Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Cyreno, and in today's video we are going to be learning how to make a sack tool, very similar to the one that is in Dead Rails on Roblox. Just to showcase what the tool is going to look like and what we're going to be learning in today's video, you have a sack that you can equip, and if you highlight any object that's able to be picked up, you can press F on it and put it inside of your sack. At any point you can grab your sack, and if you press F while you're not on an object that you can pick up, it'll just drop the last item that you picked up. Alrighty, so I'm in a brand new game, completely empty, and it's really important that we make sure that this game is published so that we can modify our avatar to R6. Just makes it a little bit simpler. And so if I start the game, oops, I have it set to first person already. Just to kind of see what the character is going to look like. It'll look like this, a little bit more simpler. Just 6 body parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 including your head. Now, to make the game first person, you can go to starter player, set the camera mode to lock first person. The first couple things we need to do is actually get everything set up. So I'm just going to go over to replicated storage and insert a folder. We're going to call this config. We're going to duplicate that folder and we're going to name this modules. Inside of each of these folders, we're going to insert a module script. The config is going to be highlight. Also remember to rename the module variable inside of these scripts as well. And inside of the module scripts, this one's just going to be called sack. And that's that for that. Now, inside of our starter player, we're going to insert a local script. This is going to be called highlight handler. And inside of there, we're going to insert a highlight. Now, we need to insert a part. And I'm just going to make this a 2x2x2 cube. Change how it looks. I think I'm going to go with plaster. And we'll make it pink. And I'm going to call this pink block. Let's go ahead and make sure that anchored is false, because we don't want this part, to not be able to move around. We want to be able to push it around. I'm going to make it massless as well. I think, you know what, actually, let's make this a little bit bigger, because I want to be able to push the block around. And so if we leave it massless and unanchored, we should be able to kind of move it around a little bit. Alrighty. So that is our block. The last thing we need to do is give it a tag. And I'm just going to call this tag collectible. Now we need to actually go ahead and find a sack to use. So inside of toolbox, just to find the sack that, I'm pretty sure they use the same mesh. It's just the money bag. Go ahead and insert that. I'm going to make this a 1x1x1 cube for the size property. Make sure anchored is false, can collide is false, and to modify the size of the actual mesh itself, let me get rid of this weld. We'll go inside of mesh and change the scale property to 0.5 for each x, y, and z value, and now it's much smaller. I'm going to go over to avatar and we're going to insert a rig, an R6 rig block, and this is just so that we can size up our sack, just to see kind of compared to our character, is it too big, too small? We can go ahead and rename this handle and insert a tool and place that handle inside of our tool. Rename this tool sack, and I like to disable can be dropped so that people cannot drop it by pressing backspace or anything, because we don't want them to be able to drop this. Alright, so now that we have that, we can go ahead and simply just put that in starter pack. If we go ahead and test out our game, we can see what the sack is going to look like inside of our game. And that's what it looks like. Pretty nice. But maybe you're wondering, how do I change how the character holds the sack? Maybe your sack, your mesh looks a little bit different and it's not holding it properly. There's this really cool plugin here that basically allows us to modify the grip property, which this property is what determines how you hold it. It just allows us to visualize that so that it's a little bit easier to modify. And so this plugin, I'll leave a link in the description. It is free, pretty easy to use. Just make sure your tool is selected, and in the window, press Edit Tool Grip. I'm going to rotate it so that the R, the Roblox sign, is kind of facing the player, kind of like that. And then I also want to kind of rotate it a little bit, just make it look a little bit more natural. And then I'm also, while holding shift, just kind of move the hand just so we're holding, kind of the neck of the bag a little bit more. And that's it. You can just go ahead and disable the plugin and you should be all set. Our grip has been updated. So now we can just go ahead and throw that in starter pack, press play, and it looks good. A lot better. Last thing we need to do is actually add the text label so that we know how many items are in the sack. This is super easy. We just need to go ahead and insert a billboard GUI. I'm going to make sure that it's always on top. The stud offset, we're going to change that, the Y, to 1.5 so it's a little bit above the sack. Just to visualize this a little bit more, we're going to insert our text label, and now you can see that. But it kind of scales a little bit weird when we move our camera around. To fix that, we just need to change the size of our billboard GUI, put the scale to 1 for both X and Y. Same thing for the text label. And now we have a square. We can set background transparency to 1. Oopsies. Then we can turn on text scaled. I like to make my text white and then add a UI stroke object. Make the thickness a little thicker. And then now this is what it looks like. Just to kind of show what it might look like. This is how we're going to end up making it look like when we're done. And let's go ahead and select a random font. Alrighty. Now let's just give these things some names. I'm going to make billboard GUI, we're going to call it info. Text label, let's call it label. Now, we are all done with that. We just have a couple things to insert inside of our sack to give it some functionality. So the first thing we're going to insert is a regular script, then a local script, then a remote function, and we're going to duplicate that. Our script, we're going to call it server. Our local script we can call client, and our functions are going to be called getSack as well as useSack. And we're just going to leave all of these scripts empty for the moment. You can go ahead and throw that back in starter player, or starter pack, I mean, and we can start on with our highlight handler. Inside our highlight handler, at the top, we are just going to initialize some variables. So I like to just put the name of the script at the top, and I like to use comments to organize all my code. So these are going to be our variables. We need a player variable. We need a character variable. We need a variable for the player's mouse. We can use player get mouse for that. We need a couple services too. We're going to need collection service. We're going to need replicated storage service, as well as run service. To keep adding onto our variables, we'll add a variable for the highlight, which is just inside of our script. And we'll create a constant, which I like to have in capital letters. And this is going to represent the maximum distance in studs of how far you need to be, or the minimum for how far you need to be for you to be able to actually highlight something. We're going to create a variable for our configuration. We can just call it configuration, or just config. And we need to require that highlight configuration module that we have inside of replicated storage. Now we're going to shell out some functions, which just means we're going to create the actual header for the functions, but we're not going to put any code into them just yet. Our first one is going to be initialize highlight, followed by highlight item, followed by is collectible, followed by check mouse. Now, we're going to start with highlight item. If you do not know how highlights work, all you have to do is set the Adorny value to whatever it is that you want to highlight. And this also goes for models as well. So all we have to do is change the Adorny to whatever our item is that we pass through. Moving on, we're going to go to initialize height. And to do this one, we actually need to jump to our configuration. Inside of this table, we're actually just going to throw in all the properties of the highlight that we want to modify. So depth mode is going to be equal to highlight depth mode dot always on top. Just like this. Alrighty, so this is what it's going to look like when you are all done. And that's the last thing that we need to do for the script. We can go back to our highlight handler, and what we're going to do is we're just going to set every property of the highlight equal to whatever the config is listed. So we're going to set depth mode equal to config.depth mode, and so on and so forth with the rest of them. So with this function, anytime we call this function, it's just going to update our highlight to match what our configuration has. So that at any point, if we need to modify what it looks like, we can just modify this script. Down in our isCollectible function, we have a couple things that we need to check for. The first thing we need to check for is if there is a mouse target. If there is not a mouse target, then we can just return nil, which means it's not collectible. Actually, let's do false. Let's return false. If it's too far away, we also will return false. And to do that, we just need to take the position of our target, subtract that position from the position of our humanoid root part, get the magnitude of that, and check if that is greater than distance. If it is, then return false, end. Let me zoom out for you. Oops, I don't need a parenthesis there. Then next, we just need to make sure that they actually has the tag. So the first thing we're going to do is if collection service has tag, mouse.target, then we're going to return mouse.target. Else if collection service has tag, and if, say, for example, you're looking at a model, you don't actually look at the model, you look at the objects in the model. So instead, maybe our rig has collectible instead, or maybe a model does, excuse me. So let's check to see if the parent has collectible instead. If the parent does, then we're going to return the parent instead, and that's going to be the collectible item. And then else, if none of those are true, then we're just going to return false. And I like to add in some comments just so that we know what is happening. Here, there's no target. Here, the target is too far away. And then here, it has collectible tag. We determine if it has the collectible tag or not. For our check mouse, this is relatively simple. We're going to make a variable called result, and we're just going to call is collectible. It's going to let us know, are we looking at something that's collectible? If the result is false, then we can just highlight the item and just set our highlight to nil, meaning there is no target. And that means we're going to remove the highlight. Else, meaning it's not given us false, it's given us an object. We're going to highlight that item. We're going to highlight the result, whatever was returned to us. And if there is a target, we'll highlight the item. Now, the last two parts of this script, we have our event, which we're just going to connect our check mouse function to render stepped, so that every render, we're going to check to see if we're highlighting something or not. And then we're also just going to initialize our highlight as well, so that our highlight starts off with the correct properties. And that's everything for our highlight handler. The next thing we're going to go into is the SAC module. This is really the bread and butter and the core of this tutorial, and really the core of the entire functionality of the SAC. So, to begin with the SAC, we need collection service. We're going to make a constant value for the max capacity, and we're going to make a table, essentially a dictionary, for the SAC contents. The SAC contents dictionary is going to hold every player in the game that has a SAC. Alrighty? And to start off, we're going to start with a helper function. And this is just going to be called find collectible, and it's going to take in a part. Our actual module functions, which we're going to put inside of the SAC table that is returned, we're going to call it use SAC. And then our second one is going to be called get player SAC amounts. And that just takes in the player. Now, with our find collectible, this function itself basically just we're just kind of looking for what are we actually collecting? Is it the part we're looking at, or is it a model? So to get this to work, to do that, we're going to do a while loop. While these two conditions are true, while part exists and part is not workspace, we're just going to check to see if the part has the tag. Does it have the tag collectible? If it does, then we can just return that part. If it doesn't, then we'll set the part equal to part.parent. So we're basically working up. At the end, we'll just return nil, meaning that we did not find anything collectible. Now we can go down to our use SAC, and we can start filling this one out. First, we need to make sure that the character exists. So if not character, then return end. We need to make sure that the humanoid root part exists. If not humanoid root part, then return end. And now we got a little bit of a complicated line. We're going to set the key of our player user ID inside of our SAC contents. We're going to equal that to either the inventory that they already have, or if there's not one in there already, we're going to set it equal to this, a table with two values. The first value is another table called items, and the second value is a variable called size, which is equal to max capacity. So what's happening here is we're basically assigning the player a spot inside of our SAC contents. It's going to look like this, just to kind of help you visualize. We'll have our user ID, and it'll be equal to two values like this. Inside of our items, we're going to have all of our items just like this. Anything like that. And so that's what it's going to look like. And what the OR logic is doing is we're going to check to see if they already have one. If it already exists, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then we're going to initialize it with the default, which is an empty item with no items, and the size is equal to the default capacity. Now, if you wanted a Game Pass or anything to have more capacity, you would then implement that functionality here so that it would change this depending on if they had the Game Pass or not. But for today's tutorial, we're not going to worry about that. Now we just need to make sure that our target exists. And we're going to get our collectible, pass through our target, and if collectible exists, then we're going to check if our items table is greater than or equal to the max size. It's a little complicated there, but this pound right here basically just says the number of items inside of our items table. If that is greater than or equal to size, then we're just going to warn that our sack is full. It's going to let the output know sack is full. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to return. If the sack is not full, we're going to clone our collectible. We're going to insert the collectible into our player's item folder or items table. We're going to destroy the collectible, the actual physical item in the world, and that's just going to simulate that you are picking it up. Here we could go ahead and print out the sack contents just so we can debug. And then you just have to return there to let the script know that you are done with that portion. If there is no target, that means we're probably trying to drop an item. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to remove the last item from the player's sack. And so if we use table.remove, you can pass through the table and then a number, but if you don't pass through a number, it's just going to remove the last item. So that helps us out. If there is a last item, meaning maybe our table is actually empty, we don't want it to, error. So if there is something to remove, we're going to clone that item as well. We're going to parent that to workspace. And then we're going to pivot it, which is basically setting its C-frame to a new C-frame. And we're just going to place it in front of the character by taking the humanoid root part position and basically adding 5 studs to it in the direction that you were looking. And that's what that's going to do for us. And so that's everything for the actual use sack. This is pretty much the entire functionality for the picking up and the dropping. Now, our get player sack amounts, this one's super simple. We just have to make sure that the player actually has an inventory for us to look at. And then we just need to return how many items are inside of their items table. And then we're also going to return a second value, which is just the size as well. And this is just so that the client can tell how many items you have and what your storage is. Else, meaning there is no inventory, we're just going to return some default values. Meaning 0 because you have nothing in your sack. If you don't have an inventory, that means you don't have a sack yet. You have nothing in the sack probably. And then the default will just be max capacity for the size. And that is everything for this module. We can go ahead and close that. Last thing we need to do is get our sack scripts set up, and this will not take us too long at all. First of all, we're going to go inside of our server script. And we're just going to create our variables. Just going to do wait for child on our use sack and our get sack. And then we also need to grab our sack module. And so I'm just going to use the require again. We're going to wait for child modules, wait for child again for sack. Let me zoom out so you can have a better look. And then all we have to do is when we're invoking both of our functions, the invoke function itself is just going to return use sack with the player in target. And same thing with get sack. It's only going to take in the player, however. We're going to return sack, get player sack amounts, player. And that is everything that we need. On the client, we got a little bit more to write on here. It's a little bit longer of a script. Let's go ahead and make our variables. Again, we need our tool. We need our player. We need user input service. We need use sack. We need get sack. We'll make a Boolean variable called equipped, and we'll set that to false by default. And we'll also get the player's mouse as well. And then we just need a variable for the sac label, which is going to be inside of handle.info, and that's our label. Now let's make our functions. When we equipped our tool, all we need to do is just set equipped to true. And when we unequip, we're just going to set that variable to false. Now I just want to create a shell for update sac label. That's just going to update our label, but we're not ready yet. And the bread and butter here is our input service dot input began whenever the player decides to, press something on their client, their controller. We'll take the input and we'll take the game processed. Game process basically refers to whether or not the game recognized the input. So if you were interacting with UI or something, game process will be true. So if our equipped is false, so if not equipped, or if game process is true, then return end. We don't really care. We don't need to continue. But if we are equipped, that means our sac is equipped. Let's see what is the button that we're pressing. In this case, we're looking for F. Make sure we do double equals. And now simply we just invoke server for use sac, send through our mouse.target, which I just realized I forgot that. And then update sac label. And inside update sac label, we're just going to set two variables, current sac amount and size, and we're just going to equal that to get sac invoke server. And we don't have to insert anything. The player is already sent through by default. I don't need to print there. Then we're just going to change the text to equal current sac amount, concatenate that with a backslash, oopsies, and then size. And then just make sure that we call it one time when the game starts to make sure that our values are up to date. Now, I just want to make sure that my values are good. I'm going to change my outline color to maybe like a nice neon green. And let's spawn in our game. If I go ahead and walk over to these items and I go ahead and try to hover over it, nothing happens. Alright, so I've actually figured out the issue. It turns out I accidentally put 0.8, so it was setting the outline transparency to a value that was invisible. So that took me a little bit to find, but I was, little things like that will cause everything to not work. So, as you can see, our highlight is working just fine. If I go ahead and press F on one of these objects, it'll pick it up. Any object that has collectible as a tag, we can go ahead and store it. If you look here in the output, we can see that all of our items are inside as well, in order. And we'll also drop from the last item we picked up to the most recent. Now, just to make sure that everything's working properly, I'm just going to add in a bunch of parts to kind of test the filling of it, because we only can pick up 10 things. So we can pick up from this far. Maybe you don't want it to be like so. As you can see, we can kind of pick. Oh, well, the highlight doesn't work from too far away, but it does look like we can pick up. So let me just make sure that inside of here, we just have to throw inside of our sac. Where are we here? We just need to make sure that and then what is our distance in picking up? I'm gonna say we'd have to be very close. So let's say 20 studs away. And we just have to do basically the same thing from the highlight here. Kind of just copy it over. So if the target dot position minus the humanoid root part dot position, which we already have that, dot magnitude is greater than max distance, then return false end. And that's just going to make sure that we cannot pick up an object that's too far away. So let's just make sure that we have that working as well, because that'll be, yep, so we cannot pick up, even if we're highlighting. If you want it to be consistent, I'd make them both the same, but with the highlighting, see, so we have to actually be within a certain amount of studs to be able to pick it up. And then once we're full, we can no longer pick up any more. And let me just try to drop. And it does look like it's not letting us drop. So let me just make sure that we're actually going to have to put that in here. Let's do that. And instead, yeah, I think all we have to do is just move it in there. Yeah, that's all it took. All right, just a few changes, a few modifications to make sure that that works. That wasn't something that I initially thought about, but glad that we were able to see that in the testing. So as you can see, we can't pick up any more, and it's going to drop the most recent item first. All right. That is everything for this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, I would absolutely appreciate if you could like the video, consider subscribing, and if you have any other ideas for tutorials or any requests, please let me know in the comment section and I'll see what I can do. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.